The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here along with my co-host Dan Rylance, and we're very pleased to welcome this evening two people who I'm sure you know pretty well if you follow the school district issues at all. We have with us from the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education the President and Vice President, President Dennis Kavanaugh, and Vice President Amy Weinsheim. That sounds weird, saying that. But it sounds better than President Bush, I guess.
Or Vice President Cheney.
True, true. Anyway, we're very happy to have them here, and we're going to be speaking primarily this evening about Scenario 7. There's a lot of confusion, I think, out there amongst people within the community as far as, first of all, what you guys actually approved. I think you approved, the wording is you approved a concept about school boundary issues, school district restructuring, that kind of thing. But we keep hearing about Scenario 7. What's the difference between a concept and Scenario 7? Or is Scenario 7 the concept?
Do you want to take a run at it?
Well, I would say that Scenario 7 is the concept.
Okay, all right.
And I actually have the resolution that we approved with us, and while we used the word concept in that discussion, although I don't think I used it, I really wasn't a big fan of the use of concept. We did, in the resolution, have some specific outcomes that we were looking towards. It didn't mean that those were set in stone and that's exactly what would happen at the end of the planning process, but Scenario 7 and the components of it were those outcomes listed in the resolution.
Okay. So I think one of the things, too, that people are very confused about is exactly what Scenario 7 really entails. It entails a multi-million-dollar referendum. We've heard like $45 million. That hasn't yet been, secured for sure as far as the exact amount. Different configurations as far as grade levels, some school closures. Can either or both of you just kind of recap what exactly is contained within Scenario 7, and then we can maybe start talking about specifics.
Scenario 7, or let's call it our planning, our 10-year plan.
Okay, 10-year plan.
Looks at a configuration of K-3, 4-8 schools, with the high schools remaining as they are. It looks at expanding our SAGE student base to by about 1,000 students if it went into fruition. There's a component for we're looking at busing to see how the busing factors impacts that. If there's cost savings there, if there's costs, what are the costs? We're looking at a movement of a population, the Casey Meadow population, to the north, through Reed to the north side. And it also calls upon, at the end of the 10-year package, that we would have six elementary schools closed. And it expands changes our middle schools to 4-8s. Now you can recognize 3 of them already are K-8, so it's making some changes to them.
Okay. Which ones are K through 8 right now?
You have
Carl Traeger.
Yeah.
Webster
Stanley. Merrill.
Okay.
And Tipler.
Tipler.
4 of them. Okay.
With Sunset in it.
Okay. All right. Because one of the arguments that Dan and I have both, I think, heard is with grades 4 through 8 being in the same school, you've got you know, a person in 4th grade being mixed with someone in 8th grade, and obviously when you get into 8th grade, your maturity level is different than a 4th grader. Have you heard those concerns at all about that kind of a configuration?
I think those concerns came up now, and I think they came up 5 years ago when we were looking at doing some things with the middle school. I think we need to understand that the 4th and 5th grades would still be self-contained classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't be doing the middle school concept, if you would. They'd be self-contained classrooms, and my assumption is that they'd be in a different wing or concentrated in one area. So they're not, the mingling, it's not other than mealtime, I suppose. But even the meals would be
not even at lunchtime. And truthfully, in our K-8 schools right now, there is the potential for mingling of students, and particularly in a school like Webster Stanley, and Dan's worked at Webster, he's familiar with that layout. The elementary students are in the middle school wing for different portions of their day, and so while that concern has been raised, I don't think it is as overarching or as angst-causing now as it may have been when we first introduced the idea, because we will be utilizing elementary school components for those 4th and 5th graders. They're not going to be running through a middle school schedule, and the reality is we have kindergartners with the potential of intermingling with 8th graders now, and it works.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I don't have a concern on that. Webster Stanley is a good example, is K through 8, but it's really K through 5 in one wing and 6 through 8 on the other, and they're really two different schools.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can walk from the hallway from one to another, but they're really separate.
And
So-
even in the middle school, the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and again, I can only speak for Webster Stanley because I really am in that building a lot,
Yeah, you are.
but those 3 grade levels are quite separate.
Sure.
There's not a lot of intermingling
Right.
even among the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They operate within their own wings.
Sure. Well, I just know on like some of the blogs, you know, that's one of the concerns. I'm sure you guys have heard that.
Yep.
But you know, when you think about even the parochial school system, you know, Lourdes has a high school in one area and a middle in the other. So.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the other thing that happens at our current K-8s is that there's a group of middle school students that actually do some mentoring to the younger students that produces a real positive environment for both ends of the spectrum. I think those middle school students have an opportunity of sharing knowledge and trying to help out the lower schools. And I think the elementary student feels kind of important when somebody comes down and talks to them. I think there's the more intergenerational thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. And I wish that all 8th graders were as mature as we would like them to be.
Yeah, some are and some aren't.
So we kind of have an idea. Now, is the concept an approved thing of Sequence 7? I mean, is it approved, or you just sort of approved it, but not really approved it? I mean, is it a first reading? Is it preliminary?
I would say I think preliminary is a good word,
Okay.
because what happened after we approved that resolution is that the planning teams were put into place, and there are
Okay.
several planning teams: a K-3-4-8 team, a boundary change team, a special education team. Oh my gosh, attendance there, that's a boundary. A transportation team, and then the actual referendum teams. I think there are 5 teams total, and as those teams move forward, if something really glaring pops up, then they are going to bring those concerns forward to either be resolved, or is this something that now makes a component of this plan not as attainable as we originally thought?
Do we have a timeline on from concept to finality? I think people want to know that too.
The timeline right now, I believe, is that the teams will be done with their work by mid to the end of October.
Right.
Okay.
And
So
each team has sort of a timeline that blends into the next team.
Okay.
They've already started, most of them have already had at least one preliminary meeting, if not 2. Some of them will begin their first meetings next week. So we're already in the planning process, and it'll roll through with some recommendations coming forward at the end of May, some more recommendations coming in June, then some recommendations coming in August, one more, I believe, in September, with final recommendations coming in October.
So fall of 2007 we should really be at a final reading and the concept will become approved with changes?
Well, actually what we're going to try to do in that stuff is we bring each section forward
Okay,
to have a workshop and a resolution.
okay.
Workshop and resolution, so that as we build this thing, we have some foundation as we move
So
along.
there will be components that actually do have what you might call a final reading,
Okay.
but the entire plan won't necessarily have that final reading until we get to September, October.
But we're trying to move along in the sequence of things.
Okay, in an optimum world, let's say you're here a year from now, what would be the changes, assuming all this goes through, in the fall of 2008? What do you see happening by 2008?
Well, I would hope that we'd be in here congratulating each other on a successful
Okay.
referendum.
Okay. Oh, so you're looking at that.
I
so
mean, that
you-
would be one.
We'd be moving towards, if not already having held
Right.
it, moving towards
Would-
having that referendum in place.
Okay, when would you have it in April then? Would that be your date for a referendum?
I think the original ones I saw was looking at the April.
Which would be the city, the local election.
Right, we're trying to put it with
Another
regular-
election.
a direct
Right.
schedule,
Yeah.
not doing a special election.
But that's a low turnout election. Is that good?
I think there'd be a high turnout if
Yeah.
there's a multi-million-dollar referendum
But
on
you
the
have
ballot.
you have a 2008 presidential election, which will be the highest turnout in. You know, I can just say from experience
Sure.
that referendums do better on high turnouts than they do on low turnouts. You probably know that. But so we're looking at sometime in 2008.
Right.
Yep.
You'd have a referendum.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I have some questions on the K-3. And let's use Webster Stanley as an example, because we're all familiar with it. You know, Dennis, I think your kids went there. I think Tucker's what, in third grade there
Yep.
now? Give me a couple good reasons, educationally, why changing Webster Stanley Elementary from a K through 5 should be replaced by a K3 and 4 through 8. Will that make that a better educational than what we have now in a really good school that's K through 5? What's the improvements?
Well, I think the K3, some of the evidence is coming back that the K3 is a group set. This SAGE was set up that way,
Okay.
but other things are set up. Seems to be a natural point at 3 that we change our class sizes from 22 at that point to a larger class, 4 or 5. And so that seems to be
The end of SAGE.
Well, even as in the rest
Even
of
in
our
the regular.
Okay.
in the rest of our
Okay.
district, where it's 22, it goes to 25 or 26 at
Okay.
that
Okay.
point. So that's a break point. We've kind of got our reading done, and we start moving into a different level of academia
Okay.
or curriculum. So that seems to be the break district. The other thing that we heard tonight in that stuff, there seems to be a maturation change. That used to be the reason K5 was fixed,
Right.
was that there was a maturation level at 5. That seems to be backing up now to 4th and 5th. The other thing that I think it offers, I think K3 will be successful well, they are in either confinement.
Yeah.
The biggest benefactors, I believe, will be the 4th and 5th graders. By transitioning better into 4th grade, we don't have this big jump at 6th grade. We can do a couple things. The 5th graders will be easier to move into 6th. The 6th grader that's not quite there has an opportunity to maybe stay back into the 5th grade pod a little bit until that maturation kicks in. So that we don't make a big jump there when at the teenage years, when puberty and a bunch of other things are going on, maybe we're making the move ahead of time so that they're settled into a stable environment.
What do you think, Amy?
Well,
Wouldn't you rather have Tucker stay at Webster Stanley Elementary through 5 like it is now?
I am not worried about that. And I will admit, that
Yeah.
when they at first blush, I kind of went, because I do have a third grader. And I have a little one at home who'll be coming up into school in a couple of years. And it's new. There aren't a lot of schools around to go and see how this works, although
Right.
we do have one right up the road.
Yeah.
But it's a smaller district. It's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But I took some time to speak with people that I really respect within our school system who feel like the K-3 model offers some really exciting opportunities to create an exemplary K-3 school. And because of the way SAGE in the state of Wisconsin, and we're sort of unique in the state in having this program, is structured for that K-3 environment, you can really have a true laser focus on that curriculum, on the components that are linked to SAGE, and the 4-5 kids moving over into a 4A configuration will get a different opportunity to, I don't want to say step up, because I don't mean step up like now they have to be 6th graders,
Sure.
but a different type of opportunity, because there is sort of that natural break, even without a SAGE component in your school. There's that natural break between 3rd and 4th grade.
Well, Webster Stanley K through 3 is on one side, and,
Absolutely.
4 and 5 is on the
Yep,
other.
they're
right.
in a different wing.
Yeah.
Their programming is slightly different. They're already kind of utilizing the teachers differently so that the kids get used to moving. And if they're in a 4-8 setting, I think that can provide some really unique opportunities to ease that middle school transition that can seem very harsh to kids, especially if they're not in a K-8 school in our district. And we do have some pretty different types of schools. If you're in a K-5 school, I think it's probably a much more dramatic transition for kids moving into that middle school. And this sort of levels the field for all of the students in transitions and creates...
So you both feel comfortable with this? Yeah.
I think the other thing, we've been trying to look at loading or concentrating some resources early, because they seem to have a bigger impact.
Oh, it does.
And so that if we can concentrate resources in that area, we shouldn't be doing things to save money later on, but we should be able to have students that won't have to struggle as much later on if we get it right early.
Right. And you may have 4-year-old kindergarten in those K-3 schools, maybe all over the city. then.
Possibly.
Huh? Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that we didn't hear anything about when you all kind of approved this concept was schools that would be targeted for closure. And of course, you know, as the consultants started to roll out some of their initial work and so forth, we did hear a lot of schools mentioned that might be closed. What is included in this concept plan as far as likely schools to close?
Well, right now, I mean, it's in phases, so it's over a 7.5-year period. But we're looking at this year. We're closing. This coming school year would be Lincoln would be closing.
Okay. Lincoln is near the UWO campus. Okay.
And then Sunset would be coming out of, or closing, coming out of Tipler,
Okay.
and going over to Reed.
Although Sunset School has been closed for...
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
We've
okay.
been
And there
operat-
really will no longer be a Sunset.
Right.
Because currently we sort of call Sunset even though it's in
Right,
Tipler.
right. It's kinda
That's
confusing.
no
Yeah.
longer.
So I mean,
Yeah.
it seems artificial, but that's
Yeah, no, I
a
understand.
second
Yeah, yeah.
school
Okay.
set. And then later on in the plan that calls for a Roosevelt.
Okay.
And
Where is
a-
Roosevelt in the town?
Roosevelt's right on Sawyer.
Okay.
Sawyer and between Sawyer and
Okay. We're trying to work with the map here, and
It's just a couple blocks off Oshkosh Ave.
okay.
Right. So Lincoln, over by the UW
UW
campus,
campus.
I'm not sure, I can't really tell if we're able to pick that up or not.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
looks
Lincoln's
like,
up
it looks
there.
like
Yeah.
we are.
Okay.
And then Sunset, which is currently in Tipler, and that's right next to where the school district administrative offices are.
Okay.
And then, of course, Roosevelt, which is over on Sawyer,
Right.
as you're kind of heading toward the Oshkosh Avenue Bridge.
Sawyer and Coolidge are the cross streets.
Yeah. Okay.
So then moving to the south side, you would be looking at Smith
Okay.
as a Smith would consolidate to the recommendation has been to consolidate with
Jefferson.
Jefferson. Thank you.
Okay.
And then Lakeside and Green Meadow.
Okay.
Okay, and Smith is
Where's
that
Smith?
the one on 18th?
18th and Oregon.
Yeah.
Okay,
18th and Oregon,
and you
okay.
said that would be consolidated with
Jefferson.
Jefferson,
Jefferson.
which
On
is on 12th by First English Lutheran Church.
Right.
Is that
Right
it?
behind it.
Okay. And you said Lakeside. Was there another one that I missed?
Green Meadow.
Green Meadow.
And
Okay.
Oaklawn, I think, was a potential.
Oh, excuse me, and on the north side, yeah, Oaklawn.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, if we're following through, then the intent would be for the Green Meadow and Lakeside to roll into the new Shapiro,
Okay.
and then for
Oaklawn would move into E. Cook.
Okay.
yeah,
And these are all elementary schools?
right.
Okay.
All the closings are elementary.
Okay. Currently K through
Right.
5.
Right.
Okay.
So there's no plan to close Carl Traeger? Okay.
No.
All right.
As
Okay.
long as we're, what about expanding? We've named 6 What schools are going to expand on? I know Emmeline Cook is going to expand. Can we go around the circuit on that a little bit?
E. Cook will expand.
Okay.
Jefferson would expand.
Okay.
Oakwood.
Oakwood.
Okay.
Oakwood won't expand, but it'll be essentially rebuilt.
A rebuild.
Rebuild.
And I think with some potential for expansion.
Okay.
And Shapiro is a rebuild.
Okay.
And Jefferson would get an addition, some additions.
Okay.
And those are just the ones that have been. Oaklawn would actually close. Oakwood.
Oaklawn would go into
Oakwood. Okay.
Yeah, Oakwood would be rebuilt.
Okay.
A rebuild.
Right. Well, one of the arguments that of course I'm sure we've all heard is, what sense does it make to close schools when we're going to turn right around and build some new ones or build additions onto existing schools? How would you best answer that question?
Well, I can take one run at it. What this plan would do would put the district in a physical plant position for the next 30 years of having relatively similar facilities for the elementary students. Right now, the physical plants vary a lot. I mean, we recognize that Carl Traeger, being a newer school, has that's kind of the gold standard, if you would. But it's a nice plant. Background noises are minimal. The learning environments are positive. What we're trying to do is convert all our schools into really positive learning environments by making sure the physical plants are compatible and similar, so that a student from any part of town and stuff, if they change schools within the district, would have a similar environment they're going into. It wouldn't be a step down or a step up, or it would be a similar environment. The other thing that does and stuff, it gives us the ability to manage our population, manage our building population a little bit more efficiently. We eliminate six less roofs to maintain. So that's how I view it, as an opportunity to put the district in a position for 2030, and be on an equal base across the city, across the school district, I should say, not just the city, but across the school district.
Okay. Along those same lines, then, if you took, I mean, obviously you're going to ask the taxpayers a referendum question, and it'll be coming in the next year probably. So what about just asking the question for money to continue with all the schools that we currently have? Because that's one of the arguments that's out there.
It is.
And I think that, and it ties into something that Dennis didn't mention that I would have mentioned in support of this consolidation plan. We would probably be looking to garner close to the same amount of money for referendum, and that would just be to do the physical repairs. And we still have 17 elementary schools that we have to staff administratively and with teachers. Some of them don't operate as efficiently staffing-wise because they are either very small, well, typically because they're very small schools. And that creates, and this is my opinion, not everybody is going to agree with me, including some of my board colleagues won't necessarily agree with me, but our SAGE schools, for instance, have lower class sizes, but they are required to adhere to some pretty strict guidelines from the state to have that SAGE, including rigorous curriculum and teacher training. But we have some small schools that are not SAGE schools. They don't receive funding from the state. They don't have those same guidelines, and they might have classrooms that are even smaller than our SAGE classrooms. And that's truly an inequity both for the students, who, because of class fluctuation sizes, may not have the same access, or they might have better access, one or the other, to a certain type of program availability. But it also creates an inequity for our staff, for people who are also not in a SAGE school but have 27 kids in their classroom, and a teacher who's in a non-SAGE school and has 10. That's a pretty vast inequity, and going to a plan like this creates some staffing efficiencies and creates some true classroom school equity that I think is important to have in place, because the reality is the money is not going to be there. That referendum would only provide to keep our physical plants at a certain level. we will still struggle with deficits regarding how to pay for the staff for the number of buildings we have,
Sure.
not just the maintenance of it.
Okay. Can I just ask a follow-up on
Absolutely.
SAGE?
Yeah.
You know, we hear a lot about the SAGE program and and how it would be affected under Governor Doyle's budget, and if there's going to be enough money there for it and so forth. What is the cost comparison between a traditional classroom, if you will, compared to a SAGE classroom? Do either of you know?
They receive a SAGE school receives an additional $2,000 per student of funding per student that is identified as a
Free and reduced
lunch student.
Okay, all right.
And actually, Gordon Hentz was just at a meeting last night that I saw him at, and they are confident that the SAGE funding will remain. It's already, I believe, Joint Finance already approved the SAGE funding for the governor's budget, and with an increase for the first time in almost 10 years.
Okay. Are SAGE students, or let's not compare students, but the SAGE program, is the SAGE program a successful program?
Yeah, I believe it is. The evidence is out there that the SAGE program, whether you look at the STAR program in Tennessee or what we have used in Milwaukee or what we use at Webster Stanley, is an example where there's a significant benefit to the to students of socioeconomic differences. They truly thrive, and they hate to use the regular student also progresses at a rate, but in between that there's a growth that clearly goes on, and that the question often asked is it sustainable as it goes on. It's sustainable for a while, but at some point the student it gives the student the opportunity of having of being at that par.
Okay.
And I think that's the exciting thing about it. And I think so often if SAGE is reduced to 15 per teacher, the SAGE has a curriculum advantage that's required to be more accelerated. The other thing that SAGE does is probably as important as anything else. There's a component for parental involvement. They reach out many different ways for parental involvement. Now, one thing that every study has almost shown that the most successful student had mom and dad behind them. SAGE reaches that through a program basis, trying to get mom and dad behind them. And that's how you get truly the successful student. When we grew up and that stuff, you know, mom and dad didn't question the teacher. And if the teacher, but if there was the mom and dad were there pushing. I think that sometimes we miss at times, but I think SAGE, through a different package, tries to get those students, those parents involved through the lighthouse and through various other activities at the school there. People forget about those components of SAGE that are out there.
And they're required. Those are required components of the program. They have to have parent and child nights that is sponsored through the school, and that's what some of that funding is used for, is creating these other opportunities. They do like a math night where parents and their students come to learn about what the math program is, and games that they can play at home with their kids or whoever the significant person is in that child's life. They have the lighted schoolhouse for after-school tutoring, and it all has to be documented as well. The state requires that they have accountability measures in place. So Dennis is right. Often you only hear people talk about, well, you know, wouldn't we all like to have 15 kids to one teacher? Yeah. Yes, we would, but it's not that simple. That's not the only thing they're doing.
Right.
I can tell you, 2 years I was at Webster Stanley, I think it's, if I was a parent, I'd wear a SAGE t-shirt all the time, because I just think it's, God, the early grades are so important. I mean, all the literature says that, you know, and if you can have a K4-year-old through K3, that's the most important years in these kids' lives, and this is a good program. And like, you know, Dennis, it's really a wraparound thing. It's not just this, you know. I want to turn to special ed for a second. What would be the impact of this reorganization on special ed? With the editorial comment in advance, you know, in the ideal special ed world, all these kids should be in the least restrictive environment. And whether you call it inclusion or mainstream, can you talk a little bit, what would be the dynamics, changes, if any, in the special ed population in the school district with this reorganization?
Well, change in population, But this would be the first effort that districts had in significant time to, right now, the special ed kid is the last one to be cited, so they're on the bus. They're being backfilled wherever there's space in an elementary school. Okay. This proposal keeps a neighborhood special ed student, for the most part, with the neighborhood school. That same group would move forward. It allows us to put the special ed programs in the schools in the neighborhoods where the kids are from. Okay. And it doesn't move them around every year or backfill wherever space is available. It gives special ed the opportunity of housing in a little bit. It's a more efficient use of their time rather than have their specialists riding from small school to small school if they're in that school.
So they're being treated like regular school kids in this.
Yeah.
And the special ed group has already been working, even prior to this reorganization effort, and they talked about it a little bit tonight as well, towards instead of continuing to rely on pull-out type services and being serviced by just one specialist teacher, looking at a broader range of services so that some of the words you use, we would actually see. We would see more inclusion. We would see more mainstreaming. We would see kids put into a regular...
That social contact is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With age-appropriate students.
Yes.
Rather than...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then hopefully that plan would help
I think
accomplish
that's an
a lot of
important
that.
component,
Right.
you know, particularly with the increase with autistic kids and the increase that, you know, parents will look at that and say, boy, that as a parent of a kid with a disability, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very quiet population.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate they're not boisterous and pounding, but they're the ones that have been, when you talk about bus rides in town, it's unfortunate, they're some of the longest bus rides of the special ed kids. Yeah. They're the kid that gets moved from school to school.
Every year.
And they're have the most difficult time transitioning from grade to grade. I mean, it's just a pretty tough little kids the way we've been moving around lately.
Sure. Well, let's talk about busing for a minute, since you
yeah.
brought it up. Is that one of your teams, your little research teams that you've got going, is looking at the busing situation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Because, you know, what we heard during the campaign was some kids are going to be walking, you know, 2 to 3 miles, and they're very small children, and, you know, some may, but likely there will be buses that will take them from home to school and back again. Thoughts?
Well, some of the busing questions that have arisen is by moving neighborhood students around, you're kind of taking a whole group of kids around. And the distance that we're talking about, I mean, Cobleston did some work about how many kids are more than a mile from school and stuff, and I think we ended up with a very small number of students actually are more than, in that 1.25 mile distance. Most of them are under a mile. So that was and Cobleston plotted, and I don't know what their little, whatever computers they use, or
Finder.
or they drove around. I mean, but they came back and said the majority of the students that we're looking at was within a mile walking distance. And some of those are the students that we're talking about already walking pretty close to that distance. So some of that I think was hyperbole to make a point. There's talk about, the other talk that we hear now stuff is mixing. Right now it's the K5 bus and the 612 bus, of mixing the populations on the bus. And we were talking about that tonight. There's various ways of doing that. I mean, you can, the first 6 rows are elementary. By doing some scheduling with your start times, maybe you could run the double buses. Run the K5 like we do now in the middle schools, by how we align our start times of the schools. So I mean, they're talking about, there's a lot of options out there, and without significantly increasing the busing costs. Of all the issues we hear about, I don't think that's an insurmountable one. There's a fixed busing cost in this district. We know there's a busing cost, and at $3 a gallon, it goes up. That's the other thing that we have been in touch with is the city, and trying to get them to look at routes and various things like that to match up. For students would have that as another option for some of the city students to have a city bus route. So I mean, we're very sensitive to that, and those are being factored into the plans.
Okay.
That we reckon we don't want kids.
Yeah, and that group has more questions than answers right now. Another piece that they are researching is the potential of, at the K-3 level, anybody who does live more than a mile, you bus those K-3 students. So that's one of the components they're looking at to see what that cost would be and how that would factor in. And the mixing of grade levels, which I think is really going to be more about simply talking to parents, because I have an 8th grader. If I am afraid to put my 3rd grader on the bus with my 8th grader, I have a bigger problem. So I think there needs to be some, real down-to-earth discussion about the fact that these are your children. Are you saying that once your child is in 8th grade, you no longer trust them to be around potentially one of their siblings? So I think some of that is just angst over change that we can overcome, and utilizing some of these tactics that Dennis mentioned, like having designated seating. And Renee Pollock, who's on the K348 team actually, and she's a parent in the community, talked about Rosendale. They do some special training with their bus drivers. Okay. When they moved to a K348 configuration, they did some different training for the drivers to know how to handle issues on the bus. And those have been the biggest questions, actually. Not a ton of people asking about cost, although that's out there. It's more about, what if there's a 4th grader on the bus with an 8th grader? Or what if you have to be on a city bus? Or what if you do live 3 miles away? How are you going to get to school? And so transportation hasn't come up with an answer. They've got lots of questions that they still need to answer and are in the process of starting to address.
Sure. You mentioned the city before, Dennis, and city buses and so forth, Amy. You all have a workshop coming up with the city fairly soon. And I'm sure that one of the things that you're bound to hear from one of the counselors is when you start closing certain neighborhood schools and the children have to go elsewhere, that is going to affect property values in that area. What would your response be to that?
Personally, I would challenge that hypothesis that the property values decrease if a school. What the community looks for is quality education for their students. And the quality education is what a community is measured against, not the neighborhood school. If we can show that we are providing quality education, that neutralizes that concern, because the concern should be over the students in achievement, and that would be the focus. I would bring it back to that. As a community, we have an obligation to provide quality education for the students. That will increase property. People will come to town because of the quality educational system, not because of a school here or a school there. It's the whole system that we have to be sensitive to that and responsive to the whole system.
Well, along those same, did you want to say something, Amy?
Well,
go ahead.
In addition, the unfortunate reality is that we do have some buildings that aesthetically, if you were to drive by them, you might not want to go to school there. You might not want to live there because that school doesn't present in a manner that you might find pleasing to send your child to. And so part of this focus of bringing our buildings to a 21st century level and creating some equity and having stellar educational opportunities should be what the city wants, what the school community and the city wants. I heard some talk last night about how we should really focus on simply making sure we add on to schools that are in growth areas and not worry about schools that are in declining enrollment areas, which I think is just irresponsible, irresponsible to our city as a whole. And we should be focusing on bringing all of our schools to an equitable level and having a stellar educational opportunity for every student, and that is what will drive people to actually move into our area, because currently we're not seeing a huge population surge. We're simply seeing a redistribution of people who already live in the community. Population surge is what we want, and that comes from having an excellent education system.
Well, I think Jefferson is a perfect example of that. I mean, you know, that's not in a growth area per se. It's the south side of town. And that school was so run down for so long. And these days, it's absolutely beautiful.
And they've maintained their population.
Mm-hmm.
It was a school that was really supposed to have lost many more students, and they have not. They've maintained their population.
Sure. So I think that's just one good example. What about the folks who say, but I did buy a house specifically in this area because of this school, and now my child is going to have to go elsewhere, you know?
Life changes.
I mean, in Oshkosh and stuff, I mean, for years you could say that. We've had one boundary change since I've been on the board. I think that was in 2000, 2001, when we did it.
There's been no boundary change since I've been on the board, so.
So I mean, and I've been on for 11 years. I mean, Oshkosh has not been a big boundary. In many other districts our size and stuff, it's an annual event. And the school district, again, makes the obligation of providing a quality education for every student in every school. Because you want to walk to school, and I understand those things, but some of the scenarios that other people have raised about, well, just expand here or move here, requires 3 or 4 other moves that you're affecting all of a sudden 10 families here, 30 families here, 40 families here, 50 families here to get up to make some space. And I think those are things that we look at from the whole system, that we are obligated to provide a quality across the board. And that's what we're doing. The person that moves into that, I can say, well, your student will have a good education. Here, or here.
And the likelihood is they're still going to have a neighborhood school. It may not be right across the street, but it's going to be in fairly close proximity.
Absolutely.
And I think one
That's
thing
a
that
great
we
point.
should say about that one is that in the plans for the K-3s, neighborhoods move. And so that your neighbor, the 2 kids that live next door to each other, will always be moving to the same school. They're not being split here and split there. This plan makes a real effort that the neighborhood will always move together. So they go from elementary to middle to high school it's a bigger neighborhood, but they all move as a neighborhood. This plan makes a great effort not to split neighborhoods.
Okay.
But we have not written that in stone.
No.
I just want to
No.
throw that caveat in there, Dennis. That's not.
But right
written in
now,
stone.
that's what's out there.
To paraphrase Chris Matthews, I'd like to play hardball for a minute. Couple political questions. Are all school board members on board for this concept? I mean, what's the board? What was the board vote on that?
It was
On the concept?
On the
The
concept.
resolution passed 6-1.
6-1. Okay.
Schneider was the dissenter, I believe.
Okay. Another hardball question. If you analyze the recent school board election, Karen Bowen and Dan Becker won. I think Becker, in the end, won by 10 votes over her. But if you look at the voting, you know, they're in totally different areas of the city. Bowen was a strong proponent of this plan. Becker, I think, was a skeptic, maybe opposed, but certainly not a big supporter of it. You know, is that a harbinger of where this city is on something like that? It was almost 50-50. And Becker's vote was the same areas that Paul Esslinger won for the mayor's race. And you just look at those. I know that's just playing with figures, but you know, I thought it was very interesting how the city was really divided over Bowen and Becker. They ran in, you know, in different areas of the city, quite different areas of the city. Is that a concern to you as a harbinger maybe for the referendum?
I love that word.
Yeah.
I do. I love that word.
Kind of feels good, yeah.
I think that's more indicative of some talk that was going on at the time of the election, and potentially people thinking that that one board member can change the course of things, and as we all know, one board member cannot.
Right.
You have to have a majority of the board moving with you. I don't think that necessarily indicates we won't get support for a referendum, particularly as the plan comes more into focus. You know, there was a real rift about the boundary issue right in the midst of the election. And not that has been completely assuaged, but a lot of what those folks were worried about wasn't really realistic. It wasn't necessarily coming to fruition.
The split high school is gone too.
Right.
That was right when we were interviewing candidates. That was the question we asked all of them.
Right.
Although I still like that idea.
Okay.
Actually, probably a good thing I wasn't running for re-election.
Well, speaking of high schools, I know that one of the things that some people have mentioned to me is maybe we could balance out our high school population if we did away with the open enrollment. Under state law, can that even be done?
We already.
Are you referencing in district or out of district? Or
In.
Yeah, we have already
we've
eliminated
Okay.
Yeah.
north to west.
Okay.
That's stopped. So that brings about 100 students back to north.
Yeah, it doesn't create complete equity, and I personally don't think that's the best approach, but it's a quick fix, so to speak, to at least get some more equity of population.
To try to address some of those single classes that are going on at north.
Okay. All right.
TIF districts is a big issue whenever we have city candidates. As school board school board people, what's the impact on TIF districts on school revenues?
We don't get them.
Okay. But no one ever says that hardly.
No.
No.
I mean, we have a lot of TIF districts.
But perhaps it doesn't impact us as much as perhaps the city, because we need to remember that Oshkosh is about 60% of our district.
Right.
And that there's 7 taxing entities that make up the Oshkosh Area School District. So we don't have there's an impact.
Right.
Of course there's an impact.
Yeah.
But it's not as large because it's spread out.
Okay. Plus you're getting funding from the state that
And
the city is not
there's
getting.
always that hope that because you've created that, this
Right,
is
it's
going
gonna-
to create
it's gonna
additional
bear
tax base
fruit,
down
yeah.
the road.
What other meaty issues are we looking at come fall? Can you identify a couple other than this? Not that this is not enough, but what?
The budget.
The budget, okay. And where are we on the budget?
We're in the process of a reconciliation.
Okay.
We have another deficit issue we need to address because there was a misinterpretation of our use of the ability to go to borrow money under $1 million without going to referendum.
I tried to follow it at your last meeting, and it was difficult for me.
It's a difficult issue to follow.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, really, what the state law says and stuff, is a school district at any time can borrow up to $1 million without going to referendum.
Okay.
For a total package. I mean, you can't borrow $1 million a year. You have it.
Got to pay it off before you can go over the.
But what we did, we borrowed money 4 years ago.
Yeah.
To pay off our debt to the retirement, which was a wise move because we fixed our costs because the rates were going up. But at the time and stuff, it wasn't real clear, but that money then counted against the million.
Okay.
But we missed that part, or that wasn't brought up, but so that's why that froze that account where the $600,000 was not available there. Prior to that, we had not used any of that money under the million.
Okay, so just an accounting error that you missed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what brought former school board member Kovic to the ring?
No.
Or was that another
I'm not
issue?
sure. I
Yeah.
mean, that was one of them, I think.
But he had even at the time of the when the plans were coming forth, he has been speaking at board meetings.
For referendum, he doesn't. He had some issues with going to referendum, but the reality is, as I said earlier, we're going to have to go to referendum at some point.
Where are we at on the state budget for education? You alluded to it earlier. Are we? I know it's early, but Sage, you said looked good. Is 4-year-old kindergarten in the budget?
Oh, I did a very cursory glance at an email I got today from a website I'm on, and it was in, but I don't know that they have the same enthusiasm for the continued support that they do for Sage.
Okay.
And it is a huge. I mean, the governor really believes in.
Yeah. Are we
4K.
moving back to the 2/3? I know we've gone down 63, 60. Are we moving back up to 66 on the per pupil?
This year, if the budget was passed, it would be 66.
Okay.
Now there's some discussion that is it 66 or 63 if you look at the increase to categorical aids, but they're saying because we increased the categorical aids, we're still at 66. I mean, we're getting pretty close to 66%.
Okay.
The issue that our concern is becoming is as the state budgetary process moves along, we're on a different calendar than every other. I mean, the county is on the calendar. City's on the calendar, and we're the July 1st to June 30.
Right.
So do I think that we're going to have a calendar before we have to move on our budget? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to pass. So that we may be in a position where we were 3 or 4 years ago, coming into October, where we need to have some numbers back from the state, and the state's saying we can't give you numbers until we have a budget.
Right.
And then we say we can't do a budget until we have your numbers. So you end up making sure you go to a lower common denominator to make sure. We'll have a safe budget. I mean, superintendent and with the new business administrator has made it clear that we're going to take some lower projections and move them forward so that no matter what happens there, we should be in relatively sound financial.
But at least at this point, it looks better than it has, say, the last year or two in terms of state funding.
Dan, you'd mentioned 4-year-old kindergarten. I know the board historically has, at least the majority of the board has historically supported the concept of 4-year-old kindergarten. What is the status of putting something like that in place now if you can get the funding?
Well, I think right now the pre-K group is using a creative model. They're using in conjunction with the community daycare centers, Head Start, and other things that are available for that population, of using them rather than than school space. Mm-hmm. There will be some school space available, but this is more like the lacrosse model, the Wausau model, which is a joint venture with the daycare providers in the community, the preschool providers in the community, where they have options where we can send our teacher into your area, you can certify your teacher. I mean, we've given them about 5 or 6 different options to sign up for at this point, and the response has been pretty favorable. Mm-hmm. There's an excitement in the community of using this approach versus you come to our house, and we're using the resource in the community, because it was not our intent to putting daycare out of business. Mm-hmm. Nor was it our intent to become a daycare facility.
Sure.
Well, and a pre-K program is really only an 1.5 hour, 2-hour program. It's never been meant to be a daycare type of program. It comes to us in resolution next week to approve further continuation of the program, and they are going after charter school monies to fund the sites that will be housed within our own facilities. Okay. They have this group called ELCO, and I can't remember what all of the letters stand for anymore. But it's it's a large group. The United Way is involved. Big Brothers Big Sisters, Head Start. I mean, there's the university, large coalition of folks working together. And should the resolution pass, it will involve probably 5 or 6 sites that are not school district sites who will be providing a pre-K program within their facilities, as well as our own sites, and then the Head Start partnership as well.
And then again, like you were saying, Dennis, that can be either a district-provided teacher going into these other facilities, or they can certify one of their own employees to do it, or however many employees.
And I think that's the exciting part about it. It's extremely flexible. We're trying to really be a good partner in this business. I mean, but you said earlier the need for, right now there's a gap. We have excellent pre-K, early childhood programs at 3, then we stop doing things till 4, or 5 rather, excuse me. So we have a year where we kind of, you gotta wing it.
Well, and early childhood targets children who have some type of issue with education, and the pre-K program is really intended for anybody who is interested in having their children participate in a program like this. And it does offer opportunities to create more inclusion and mainstreaming for the kids that we do work with in early childhood.
I think in 10 years we'll see this all over. I just think it's...
And I think one thing that's interesting, that does squeak. There's some evidence out there that your word vocabulary coming in to kindergarten or first grade is almost a predictor of how successful you'll be as your senior in high school. There's hard evidence that says the bigger your vocabulary at that point, the more successful you're going to be. Some of the kids coming in they use the same words over and over, and they get frustrated and they get angry and they don't move on. Whereas a kid coming in has a broader use of the language, A lot of pre-K works on language. We all know it's a vital component for everything, but there's a real emphasis on language skills.
These are a couple of dumb questions. I
No
drive
question is a
between
dumb
Minnesota and
question.
North Dakota all the time. Governor of Minnesota Pawlenty gave a scathing report to the legislature telling them to shape up grade 12 in the Minnesota high schools. He said it was the most wasted year in the 12-year curriculum, and he said he wanted some changes. I just thought that was interesting. You know, looking back at my kids and stuff, I'm thinking, you know, there's some merit in that. And that was a Minnesota thing. North Dakota has gone to 9th grade academies. You were flirting with 9, 10, 11, 12. The main cities in North Dakota, because of that dropout thing and the big problems, they now in the larger schools have a 9th grade academy, exclusively 9th grade.
Interesting.
And so then when they get to high school, they claim they're better prepared because they've had this really intensive transition year. So I just share a Minnesota and a North Dakota concept with you.
But I think there's always conversation about the senior year. People are applying for their scholarships. They're getting more concerned about schools, and it's a down year. I think the academic concern is a legitimate one, and I think we need to make sure that we are providing the academic challenges for a 12th grader, a senior in high school, because I think
Yeah, we've talked so much about Kate, I just thought I'd throw it in
Yeah.
because
Well,
that's
and,
on the other
you
end
know,
of the...
having come here from California, and I graduated from high school in California, and my senior year, I wouldn't say it was wasted, but just 20 years ago, the difference in opportunity that high schools had then compared to what my daughter, who will be a sophomore next year, will have as a senior, is night and day. I was on the exact same track that she's on. I took biology, chemistry, physics, 9, 10, 11. I took advanced algebra, geometry,
physics.
Trigonometry, calculus, all in high school. She's doing the exact same thing. But by the time I hit my senior year, they had nothing else to offer me. So I was taking photography and ceramics and, you know. Whereas my daughter will be able to take advantage of CAP courses or youth options or AP or, you know, whatever. So in that respect, we've certainly, I think, nationwide, but particularly in Wisconsin, it's one of the reasons we chose to try Wisconsin, because we knew that there were those types of options at a much greater level and more depth than other states have available. But I think there's, you know, we only have 22 credits required for, I mean, we keep talking about upping our graduation requirements too, because some kids will hit that 22 mark and...
Playtime.
Yeah, exactly.
Slough off the rest of the year.
Yeah.
But there's also some talk, you know, when you look at demographers with us, people with gray hair retiring, almost every person's needed is for the workforce. So there really needs to be effort to educate and promote everyone through the school. We can't afford to have somebody not contributing. I mean, there's some real, and in Wisconsin, I think that in 5 years, we're 160,000 workers short of what we have today.
All right, well, this hour has zipped by. I want to thank both of you for being here.
Very,
And
very entertaining,
I know,
very
Dennis, before we started, you had said that you know, you wanted to bring forth some information in the future too. And anytime you guys want to
I appreciate that.
come on, feel free. We'd be happy to have you. You know, because this is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
It's the biggest
That's
thing
an
that
understatement.
the biggest thing the district has done as long as I can remember. And there's no easy answers. So.
I think in the fall, when they move from preliminary to final and these
That'd be
various
great.
committees have come
Great
back in,
timing.
I think that would be a propitious time to have
Very
them back.
good. Well, thanks very much again.
Well,
And
thank you for having
Dan,
us.
thank
Thanks
you.
for
And
having us.
as always, thanks to all of you at home. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care and keep your eye on us. We've got All Right on Oshkosh.